Hi, this is Paul Mallory with this latest Freestyle Thinking video on the subject today of habits. And our title today is What Habits Are Shaping Your Life? It's important to understand we act very much out of habit a lot of the time. And you can reprogram the habits of your life. And we'll look at how habits become automatic behaviors and what you can do about them. So if we go back a while now to the 1890s, a guy called William James was an eminent philosopher and psychologist. In fact, he was known as the father of American psychology. And in 1892, he said this: all our life is but a mass of habits. So most of our daily choices are in fact habits. What does that mean? We start out making deliberate choices about how we act, what we do, what we eat, what we drink, and so on. But those deliberate choices over time become automatic. We start to fly, in effect, on autopilot. But habits are not our destiny. We can choose our habits once we know how habits work. Think about all the things you do and act in a fairly unconscious kind of way. We walk, we sleep, we eat, we drink, we might smoke, we exercise, we drive cars, we do all kinds of things in a fairly unconscious kind of way. It is how we spend our time, how we spend our attention, where we choose to focus our attention, and how we spend our money. So this is so powerful. There's really nothing you can't do if you get the right habits. So let's think about how habits form. Our brains have evolved to be really efficient. They want to save effort, they want to save space, and our brain is trying to be as efficient as possible to restrict the extent to which our heads need to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because that becomes rather a problem when we're giving birth to babies. We need the head to be restricted in size. So we've evolved to have large brains, but our brains are trying to be efficient and not need to be huge brains. So our brains take shortcuts, they filter, they generalize, they make patterns, and they're trying to save effort. So your brain is trying to stop you having to make conscious decisions about things you do over and over again during the course of the day. In other words, your brain converts a sequence of actions into an automatic routine. For those of you who drive a car, that's actually quite a complex set of actions and instructions. If you sat down to program a computer, as people are doing right now, in how to drive a car, it's actually quite complex. There's a lot going on there. Think about it for a moment. You have to think about where you're pointing the car with the steering wheel. You have to think about changing gear if it's a manual transmission, a stick shift if you're in the US. You have to think about indications, other road users, judging distances, your speed, driving safely. All of this while choosing a selection of music and talking on the telephone. So it's a very complex set of activities. But as experienced drivers will know, quite often you get to the end of a journey and think, I'm not sure I even remember making that journey. By the way, please don't be using the telephone while you're driving. It's very, very dangerous. Or texting. So our brain is saving us the effort of consciously having to say to ourselves, right, now change gear, put the clutch in first, shift the gear lever, release the clutch, press the accelerator, watch that car behind you. It all becomes an automatic. In other words, it becomes habit. So we're converting the sequence of actions into an automatic routine to save effort, to save space. And there are 3 steps in creating this loop, this sequence of actions that becomes a habit. The first step is a cue, a trigger. And the cue or the trigger is the thing that causes us and our brains to go into automatic mode and choose a habit that is appropriate to this situation. So perhaps for you, it's sitting in the car and closing the door, triggers the habit of starting the engine and driving off and so on. So that's the cue, the trigger that begins the loop, begins the habit in operation. The second step in the loop is the routine, and that is where we are actually, it might be physical, mental, emotional routine. That is where we are going through the steps involved in the habit. In the case of driving a car, we're going through the steps, the gear shift, the indicator. We're going through the steps necessary to drive the car. That's the routine. So you have the cue or the trigger, then the routine. The third step is the reward. And that's the payoff we get from putting the habit into operation. It's there so that we can judge whether we need to remember that habit so that we can use it again later. And our reward from driving the car might be that we get somewhere and we successfully complete the journey in a much more comfortable and safe way than we might have done by taking other modes of transport, or something like that. So our brain gives us a little reward boost for completing the habit. So the 3 steps in the loop: cue, the routine, and the reward. And when it becomes automatic, when it becomes a habit, the cue and the reward feel like the anticipation of using the habit and the craving almost for the reward. So we really, we can think about chemical habits in this sense, like smoking, for example, for some people drinking, that we are anticipating these events. We're looking forward to them because we know we're going to get a reward, we're going to get a payoff, and we start to crave them. I'll talk a bit more about drinking as an example in a moment. Now, your brain cannot tell a good habit from a bad habit. All it knows is that it's enabling your brain to be efficient and it's saving you having to make lots of conscious decisions. So your brain can't tell whether going out for a run around the park or eating a bag of donuts is a good habit or a bad habit. Each of those will become automatic if we have the cue, the routine, and the reward, and if we repeat it enough times that it just becomes unconscious, something we just do. It becomes part of our daily routine, part of our habit, part of our habitual approach. So we can begin, as you will have guessed, we can begin to follow these habits rather than even exercising common sense. These are just the things we do habitually on a repeated basis. What can we do about this? How can we have more good habits and less bad habits? Well, the first thing is it's very hard to eradicate, to remove a habit. What you can do is replace a habit. So we'll talk about that. And the first step is self-awareness, as it often is with personal development stuff. The first step is to be aware. So first of all, you have to observe the cues and the rewards that you're getting if you want to change your habits. Cravings typically are what drives our habits. So you have to notice that you are having a craving or you are being drawn into exercising a habit, and that you are experiencing some form of reward, which might be chemical, it might be emotional, it could be an emotional payoff or a physical payoff. So first step, observe your habits, become aware of cues, routines, and rewards. If we talk about drinking as an example, I mentioned it just now, it's interesting because obviously Alcoholics Anonymous, the support service for people with a drinking dependency, focuses a lot on how to help people with drinking dependency. And actually what they focus on is changing habits. They focus on changing habit loops. And when they look into what are the benefits, the rewards that people get from being dependent on drinking, it's not necessarily that they crave being intoxicated, that they're craving being drunk. In fact, quite often they don't even enjoy the effect. But the kinds of things people tend to crave are things like escape and relaxation and companionship and blunting their feelings of anxiety, having emotional release, forgetting their worries. So those are the payoffs, those are the rewards they're getting from doing the routine, from doing the activity. And they will have some cue that causes them to think, maybe we'll go and have a drink. So something will trigger it to begin with. So the strategy for disrupting these patterns, for replacing bad habits that you may have with much better, more rewarding, more empowering habits, the strategy is to actually keep the cue and the reward, but to find new routines, find new ways of satisfying the reward, the payoff that you're looking for. So we're substituting one routine for another. Your brain can be reprogrammed in this way. It does need a lot of work and it does need self-awareness to change a really ingrained habit. But just think about how much of our lives we spend acting out of habit, and think about how our lives might be very, very different if we changed our daily habits. You have to also believe that you can change, and a big part of Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, is having a support group. That helps people to believe they can change because they see other people who have changed. So they begin to believe it might be possible. Now, you might not want to have a support group to change your habits, but it's very helpful to have somebody supporting you, and somebody that you can, perhaps a coach or perhaps a friend who can go on the journey with you and talk to you about how you're changing your habits. Um, and really, bad habits are, you want to think about your bad habits and think about replacing them. So you might want to change, for example, a bad habit of eating high sugar content that's causing you to become overweight. You might want to change that with an exercise habit. And what you're going to have to do is work out how to get the same reward that you currently get, the same emotional payoff that you currently get from your habit, through a much healthier routine. You still have a cue, you still have a reward, but you change the routine in the middle, the thing that you actually do to achieve the reward. That's the process. William James, who I mentioned earlier, the father of American psychology, when he was in his 30s, he felt like he was underachieving in life, and he was a bit lost, as many of us have been in our lives. And in his 30s, actually, he became quite suicidal, and he decided to change his life in a major way. And what he did was he decided to do a one-year experiment. He decided that he would experiment to see whether he could use free will to change his destiny. Could he actually make big changes in his life? And he said a couple of interesting things. He said, my first act of free will should be to believe in free will. So people debate philosophically whether we have free will or whether everything in the universe is determined and we're just going along with it. Well, William James' first act was to say, I'm going to choose to believe in free will and see to what extent I can take control of my life. Really taking his power back in terms of the way he was going to behave from there on. And then he said, the will to believe is the most important ingredient in creating belief in change. So the method for changing is habits. It's changing our habits. And the most important ingredient, according to William James, is choosing to believe, having the will to believe that he was able to create change through changing his habits. Then he said, once we choose who we want to be, we grow into that. I find that an amazingly powerful statement. Once we choose who we want to be, we grow into that. Are you choosing who you want to be, or are you acting purely out of habits that you've probably picked up without even realizing it? These were once conscious choices and decisions you made, and now they are just daily habitual routines that you live through. So are you choosing who you want to be, or are you just being your habits? And in the end, your habits are ultimately what you choose them to be. So I think it's really powerful for freestyle thinkers to think about, who do I want to be in life? What kind of person do I want to be? And what habits do I need to choose and create to support that kind of person? And then replace any bad habits that you choose to with more empowering good habits that have the same payoff, the same triggers, but a different routine in the middle to help us perform and achieve what we want to in life. And that's it. I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for listening.